When you're looking at this right now, you can see the slideshow, and if you look down at the bottom, you'll also see the presenter notes. And normally I don't do this, but for today, I'm going to be reading them so that you can see exactly what is available to you and to the teachers. I try very hard, even if I have to read parts of something, I try very hard to make it appear as if I'm not, so there's lots of eye contact. I do use the presenter mode, but I can't show you doing that, or that when I'm doing that, because you won't see the presenter box. But there are two ways of accessing it in Google. You can go up to this button and you can see presenter view. And when you click on it, you'll get a box down in the corner that gives you the speech word by word by word. Or when you're in the full screen mode, if you go down to the lower left-hand corner, you'll see some polka dots and up at the top, it can open the speaker's notes, and you can resize that if you want so that you can see most of the screen. In the Google version, everything that is on the screen is also in the notes, because the screen very often covers up a good part. I mean, the notes often covers up a good part of the screen. So it's for the presenter's advantage to have everything written down for them. In the PowerPoint versions, that's not the case. The PowerPoint has a screen on the right, so it doesn't cover the actual image that you're seeing. So we don't have to be as particular there. But at any rate, Melissa got lost somewhere. Okay, all right. So this is the first module, and because Janice and Melissa joined us after I started talking, I just want to check first. Janice, do you know who your avatar is for today?
Yes, I'm Bill.
Good. Okay. And Melissa, do you know who yours is? Oh, we lost her again.
I'm having connection issues.
Okay. Well, do you know who your avatar is, Melissa?
No.
Okay. You are Jill.
Okay.
And you're a female and you're 21 or older.
Okay.
So that's important to remember. Okay. So I've gone through the introduction and we start the slideshow. So the first screen says suffrage timeline. Is the word suffrage a familiar term? And I ask the students to respond. Anybody know what suffrage means? You can really respond. Okay, well, whoops, I just lost my, okay. What it means is the right to vote. And if you look at the word suffrage, what it sounds like is that the word suffer is in it. They don't come from the same root word, but in fact, in order to gain suffrage, many people suffered. And that's what we're going to learn about today. The importance of voting is that the people who win elections make the law, and the voters decide who win the elections. People without the vote are really without power, because those people who are in office don't have to listen to them. What they want is to get reelected. So they're going to try to solve or address the voices and the needs of the people who are going to keep them in office. And for that reason, from the very birth of our nation, people have fought, gone to war, gone to jail, and died for the right to vote. I'm going to ask you to open your minds and shift your perspective to see the world the way they were. But let's start with the basics. New Jersey. Who can vote in New Jersey? Do you know any of the requirements? You can jump in. You can hit your space bar if you're only going to mention one thing. So you don't have to go through the whole clicking off of the audio. Rosemary?
I recall that you cannot be a convict. You can be paroled or an ex-convict. The other thing is that you have to be 18. You can enroll and register. I said enroll, sorry, register at 17, but you must be 18 in order to vote. And I recall that you have to be in the county 30 days, a minimum of 30 days in the county that you're going to vote.
Good.
I'm forgetting something else. I'm forgetting something.
The only thing that you forgot is that you have to be a citizen. And I will add to your comment about not being in prison for a conviction of a felony. When you are released and are on parole or probation, you have to re-register. And it's the only time. If you have a sentence and it's only parole or only probation, you don't have to re-register. But if you've been imprisoned and are released, then you must re-register. So that wasn't always the list. The requirements for voting used to be very different in ways that are kind of hard for us to imagine today. But that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to imagine what it was like for white men, for African Americans, for women, for young people, for Native and Asian and Hispanic Americans and others who wanted to vote over the first 200 years of our history. We're going to ask you to keep your video on until you get directions about turning it off and on. And it's also important for you to be on gallery view. So if you're not on gallery view right now, if you would make it gallery view, I'd appreciate it. Any questions about doing that? Okay. All right. When you are on gallery view, you can see that everybody's there. And today, all of us are eligible to vote, as long as we're citizens. But that wasn't always the case. So let's go to the avatars. Okay. We're going to go back to the very beginning of our history, to the Revolutionary War. Americans have been fighting for the vote from that time. We fought a war with England, and the Revolutionary War was for our independence. But what did we want to be independent for? Well, one way to look at that is that we were fighting the Revolutionary War because we wanted to have a say in what went on in our country. So you can think about it as the right to vote, a war for the right to vote. The colonists were upset, among other things, because they were being taxed by the English Parliament, and they had no voice or vote to select the members of that parliament. You probably remember the famous protest slogan, "No taxation without representation." Or from school, you remember the angry colonists throwing the tea into the harbor when they had no voice to make a difference in the amount of tax they had to pay on that tea. Well, in the Revolutionary War, the war for the right to vote, nearly 17,000 colonists died in action. And between 8,000 and 12,000 colonists were taken prisoner of war, and many thousands of them died as well from disease. Okay, so it's 1789. The war's, oops, I think I skipped one. Sorry about that. So the war is over, and having won the war, the leaders of the new nation met and argued, and boy did they argue, and they finally agreed on the rules under which the government would operate. And they set those rules down, and it is known as the US Constitution. Many of the leaders in that new nation opposed creating a strong central government. I mean, after all, they'd just gotten rid of King George, and they argued that the balance of power should favor the new states and not the federal government. And specifically, when it came to the debate over who could vote, the founders decided not to define voting at the federal level. Instead, they gave that responsibility to the states. And this is a theme that you'll keep coming back to. Okay, so it's 1789. The founders have decided who's going to vote. Who is it that may vote at this time? Do you know? Can you share?
White
Okay, white. What else?
men,
Man.
Mm-hmm.
With property? No.
right, with
Okay.
property. And one more thing.
Over 21?
Yeah, you got them all.
Well, I'm George Washington. That's why.
Okay,
That profile.
okay. So if you look at your avatar cards or remember what the characteristics were, and if you're male, white, 21 or older, and you own property, you can leave your video on, but everybody else, turn your video off right now. Okay, and I should turn mine off too. Okay. So Mary Beth, guess what? You've got an awful lot of power in your hands right now. You are the one person who's representing everybody else in this classroom. And if we had an actual classroom, say with 20 people in it, you would see 2 screens left on and everybody else dark. And it's pretty impactful when you see that number of screens turning dark at that first point in art history. Okay, but let's move on 60 years or so to 1856. The country expanded west, and at this point in time, they went from 13 states to what are now 32 states. And the population grew from 4 million, which was the count in 1790 census, to 23 million in the 1850 census. In addition to that, as people moved west, customs changed and they didn't pay as much attention any longer to social position. And a third factor was that men who had fought in the Revolutionary War and in the War of 1812 and couldn't vote because they didn't own property began to push for suffrage. And finally, they won the right to vote state by state, because remember, the states have the authority to decide who can vote. So we've reached the next milestone on our timeline of suffrage. By 1856, North Carolina was the last state that gave up property requirements as a condition of voting. So again, it's now 1856. What do we need to cross off here in order to show who can vote at this point in time?
Property owner.
Property.
Okay, so we cross off property owners. Take a look at your avatar. And if you are a male, white, and 21 or older, you can turn your video back on. Okay, just one more person. And again, if we had a class of 20, you would probably have 4 people's faces on the screen now, and the rest would be black. Okay. All right, the right to vote is not mentioned in the Constitution. And it wasn't until the end of the Civil War that the Constitution was amended to set the first nationwide rules about suffrage. Here's what happened. About the same time that the states were eliminating property ownership as a requirement for voting, the country was facing one of the biggest challenges in our nation's history, one that would have a profound effect on suffrage. In the mid-1800s, the tensions between the North and the South were mounting over the question of slavery and whether the new states, when they entered the Union, would be free states or slave states. The election of Abraham Lincoln brought those tensions to a head. The South withdrew from the Union and hostilities began. And between 1861 and 1865, America waged the bloodiest war in our history, the Civil War. The war was fought over slavery and the rights of African and Black Americans, but in the end, it was also about suffrage. The North won the war, the Union was saved, slavery was ended, and African American males were given the right to vote. But the country paid an enormous price in blood for the fight for the vote. Between 650,000 and 850,000 Americans died as a result of the war. That's more than in any other war we've ever fought. 620,000 Americans equaled 2% of that nation's population in 1860. Today, the equivalent would be losing 6 million Americans. 1 in every 4 soldiers who went to war did not return. After that war, freeing nearly 4 million formerly enslaved people left really important questions. The first of which was, what rights did the newly freed, what rights did the freed African Americans have? And were the formerly enslaved people citizens? And if they were citizens, could they vote? 3 constitutional amendments answered those questions. In 1865, at the end of the Civil War, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution passed. It ended slavery. In 1868, the 14th Amendment made all people born in the United States, including the formerly enslaved, American citizens. This is the first time, by the way, that we have a definition of citizenship. Prior to this time, common law held that only 2 groups of people were citizens. Either they were white people born in or descendants of those people who were recognized as citizens by the states, or those who were born outside the boundaries but naturalized within. Freed slaves fell in neither category. The 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution provides that, with a few discrete exceptions, people born in the United States are citizens of this country, irrespective of race, ethnicity, or the national origin of their parents. 2 years later, in 1870, the 15th Amendment changed the suffrage laws across the country, and it finally gave African American citizens the right to vote. The 15th Amendment stated that the rights of citizens to vote shall not be denied by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 15th Amendment is the first time that the federal government has stepped in on the question of voting. So, who has the authority normally to decide who gets to votes? Well, the answer is the states. But the point here is that the 15th Amendment, is the first time that the government has put a limit on that authority. Okay, so what do we need to cross off now? It's 1870. Who can vote after the Civil War?
White.
Okay, we need to cross that off.
Cross off male. Well,
Not yet,
male. Yeah, okay.
not yet.
Oh,
That's the answer to your question, Rosemary. Okay. Rosemary asked me when she got on, she said, I'm seeing there are no women in this group. Why? And I said, I can't tell you yet. Okay. So if you are a citizen, a male, and 21 or older, you can turn on your video.
okay.
Okay, and normally now we would have one more person, and I think that should be Rosemary. Oh, are you going to hide behind your, there she is. Okay, and now again, we would have maybe 6 people out of a class of 20 whose pictures would be showing. So at this point, I say to the kids, so why aren't you voting and why aren't you voting? And I will call them by name from the images that are on the screen. And they'll tell me, oh, because I'm 10 years old, or because I'm not a citizen, or because I'm a woman. And generally what I will get is a lot of women, a lot of people saying women. And so I say, so how do women feel? You know, now, and usually they'll say, I'm getting pretty annoyed because it's not fair that just those men are making the decisions that affect me as a woman, that I should have a say in this too. And then we move to the next milestone. So it's now 1920. It's been more than 130 years since men were given the right to vote, and it's been 50 years since African-American men were given the right to vote. But still, with the exception of some states in the West, women could not vote. And I'll make the point here, which I wouldn't necessarily do in a group that had people outside of the state of New Jersey, but New Jersey actually did allow women to vote at one point in time and then took the right away again. So at this point in time, 1920, New Jersey also did not allow women to vote. By the mid-1800s, women were losing their patience. Many of the women in the nation had been politically active as abolitionists, fighting to end slavery. Many were also leaders in the political campaigns to outlaw alcohol. So they had found their voice and experienced some political power. So in 1848, they began to organize, and they organized to gain the right to vote. These women were called suffragists. Susan B. Anthony and Ida B. Wells were among the most famous. These women marched, they gave speeches, they held protests, they lobbied politicians. The suffragists' fight for the vote for women's suffrage took more than 70 years. And that first wave of suffragists, including Susan B. Anthony, did not live to see it happen. In the early 1900s, a new generation of women took up that fight, and these suffragists were even more aggressive than their 19th century sisters. They traveled around the country and campaigned state by state to try to convince legislatures to change state laws. They also pressured members of Congress and the President of the United States to propose a constitutional amendment. The 15th Amendment had overridden state authority to say that the states couldn't deny citizens the right to vote based on race. The suffragists wanted a constitutional amendment modeled on that didn't deny them the right to vote based on sex. They were unstoppable. Some of them were arrested, and they could have paid a small fine to be set free, but instead they chose to go to jail. They wanted their stories to be told. Pictures of the women being arrested. Now, these were mothers and daughters and sisters and wives and lawyers and teachers. These photographs were in the newspapers. Some of the jailed suffragists refused to eat. They went on hunger strikes because they wanted people to know that they were willing to die to get the right to vote. The women on the hunger strikes got thinner and thinner and weaker. They even needed help to walk. Their pictures were in the paper, and President Woodrow Wilson, who refused to support the constitutional amendment for women's suffrage, started to get really worried that a suffragist might die. The stories and the pictures in the newspaper were turning public opinion in the favor of the suffragists. To make sure they didn't die, the starving suffragists were force-fed. They were strapped down, a rubber hose was pushed down their throat to their stomach, and liquid food was poured through that hose. It was painful. Finally, President Wilson gave in. He agreed to support the suffrage amendment, and the women were released from jail. And the 19th Amendment, guaranteeing women the right to vote, was ratified, which means approved, and made into the law of the land in August of 1920. For the second time, the first being that 15th Amendment, the federal government has stepped in to decide who can and who cannot vote. But once the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920, the work of Black women was not done. They had to continue their fight for full voting rights all the way to 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act that prohibited racial discrimination in voting. So 20, who can vote now? Who do we need to cross off?
Male.
Male.
Okay, let's cross off male. And if you are eligible to vote now, will you please turn on your video? Okay, now again, I'm going to tell you, in a class of 20, there are some avatars that are Black women. There are some avatars that are Asian. There are some avatars that are Native Americans and Hispanics. And what I do there is I say, I'm sorry. Yeah, you technically have the right to vote, but turn your video off. You don't really yet. And that too is pretty impactful when the kids say, what do you mean? Like they don't have, because they'll say, I thought all the women got the right to vote at that time. So it's a learning experience. It's complicated. We've seen how the state laws and the Constitution itself changed over 2 centuries to remove barriers to voting, to include the poor, African-American men, women, and young adults. But there's more to the story. Despite the trend toward greater suffrage, there's been a consistent push throughout history in the opposite direction. Throughout our history, there's been powerful resistance to allowing certain groups to cast their votes, even when the law has given them this right. So even though we've worked through some major milestones, we're not done. There are setbacks and there are breakthroughs that we need to talk about. The 19th Amendment, as I said, promised women that their right to vote would not be denied on the basis of sex. Yet, even after that milestone, millions of women and men were still excluded from the right to vote because many of the barriers to suffrage remained. The fight over the amendment was not just about sex, it was also deeply entwined with race. While the women's suffrage movement had its roots in the anti-slavery movement, early suffragist leaders, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, later split off from their allegiance with the abolitionists. They were outraged that under the 15th Amendment, Black men would get the vote while white women were still denied. Decades later, when the 19th Amendment was up for debate, again, race played a part. Southern politicians especially seethed over the prospect of enfranchising millions of African-American women, just as the 15th Amendment had enfranchised Black men by law, if not in practice. In the face of racist opposition in Congress, which could have led to the defeat of suffrage for any women, white women, unfortunately, betrayed the Black women who had also long fought for the right to vote. Whites in the Jim Crow South knew all too well how to keep African Americans from voting. They used poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, violence, and lynching. They had long kept Black men from the polls, and now they knew how to keep Black women from the polls as well. The ratification of the 19th Amendment marked for African American women a start, not a finish. It fueled a new chapter in the struggle for voting rights in the United States, a movement that Black women led all the way to 1965 and the passage of the Voting Rights Act. Also excluded from franchise were Native Americans, many of whom were not even US citizens until 1924. Even after that, even after 1924, Native Americans in some states were considered wards of the state and were not guaranteed the right to vote until 1965 and the Voting Rights Act. Voting rights activist Gertrude Simmons Bonin, who was Zitkala Sa of the Yankton Sioux Nation, was prominent in their women's suffrage movement. She and other nationally known Native suffragists didn't necessarily want to only have US citizenship. They also wanted to have recognition of their citizenship in their tribal nations and their treaty rights, particularly to land. They wanted to use suffrage and the US citizenship to save their land and their communities. After the 19th Amendment was ratified, Bonin spent the next several years going to white women and saying, now you have the vote. Please fight for my people. Don't forget your Indian sisters. So along with African Americans and Native Americans, other groups continued to be excluded from the vote. Asian American immigrants who were long ineligible for naturalized citizenship on account of race only won the vote starting in 1943. Among those advocating for both women's suffrage and immigrant rights was a young woman named Mabel Pinghua Lee. She was about 5 when her family managed to immigrate to the US from Canton, China in 1900. And that was through a narrow exemption in what was called the Chinese Exclusion Act. Starting as a teenager, Lee became a powerful voice in the suffrage movement. People talked about her speeches and about how the audience was Mabelized by her ability. White suffragists thought she was phenomenal, so much so that they asked 16-year-old Lee to march on horseback at the front of a major suffrage parade in New York City in 1912, which was before the 19th Amendment, mind you. It would take more than 20 years after the 19th Amendment's ratification for Lee and other Chinese American immigrants to become eligible for citizenship and thus win the right to vote. It wasn't until 43 and the passage of the Magnuson Act that Chinese immigrants could be naturalized. Truly broad access to American citizenship and voting rights wasn't available until the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. And then the Civil Rights Act of 1965. These acts removed race as a barrier to immigration and citizenship, effectively ending 2 centuries of restrictions and legal disenfranchisement. So now if we add those other racial groups, and I tell those people who are of Latin, Asian, and indigenous descent, they can turn their screens on, but we still keep Black women off until 65. Let's go back a little bit and learn a little bit more about voter and voter suppressions of the Jim Crow era. The first setback that we need to explore happened after the Civil War in response to the 15th Amendment that gave African Americans the right to vote. The Constitution said that African Americans could vote, but there were places in the country where people went to extreme lengths to ensure that they did not. Local and state laws were passed that kept the races separated and did everything possible to prevent Black citizens from voting. These were called Jim Crow laws, and they disenfranchised and removed political and economic gains made by Black people during the Reconstruction period. Jim Crow laws were enforced until 1965, and the punishments for defying them were severe. Obstacles were put in their way for voting too. They had to take literacy tests and property requirements, and their names were removed from voter lists for made up reasons, and they prevented anybody from serving time from voting, and sometimes people also had to pay a property tax. The 1960s were years of social upheaval, an upheaval that included a national movement to end Jim Crow, to address the unfair treatment of African Americans, including denying them right to vote. Civil and voting rights champions emerged, like Martin Luther King, who advocated nonviolent resistance. Under his leadership and inspiration, Blacks and whites marched, demonstrated, held sit-ins, and risked their lives to stand for African American rights. The civil and voting rights activists in the South were beaten and arrested, and some were killed. One man was murdered for registering Black voters, and 4 young girls were killed when the church they attended, which was a center for civil and voting rights meetings, was bombed. Dozens of activists were shot. But the activists continued to march and demonstrate. On the Selma to Montgomery March for Voting Rights in 1965, state troopers attacked those marchers with nightsticks, tear gas, and whips. And the violence was shown on national television and helped shock the nation and move the president to act. So we've heard several times about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And on August 6th, 1965, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. It was not an amendment to the Constitution. but it was a federal law that outlawed unfair voting practices nationwide. It gave the federal government the right to look into elections where voting rights of the non-white population appeared to be denied, and it protected the rights of all people of color, Black, Native, Asian, and more. Again, the federal government was setting a limit on the authority of states to determine who could and could not vote. We have one last change to the Constitution, though. And the last change about suffrage happened in 1971 when the 26th Amendment to the Constitution lowered the voting age to 18. We've just seen that the fight in 2 of the 3 cases we've covered involved war, and the 26th Amendment indirectly involved war as well. Here's the background. As we said when speaking about civil rights, the 60s were a decade of unrest and protest in this country. There was also protest against the Vietnam War. Many Americans, especially the young, wanted to end our involvement. At the time, the country had a draft. 18-year-old men had to register with the government, and from that pool, the Army and other branches of the military drew the names of men who had to serve. The men drafted had absolutely no choice in the matter. In the 1960s, tens of thousands of these young men went to Vietnam. More than half the American servicemen killed in Vietnam were between 18 and 20 years old. Protesters raised their voices using the slogan, "Old enough to fight, old enough to vote." And the 26th Amendment was passed more quickly than any other amendment ever passed, and it gave 18-year-olds the right to vote. So it's 1971, who can vote? We have to change 18 to 21, and I can be shown again. Haha, there I am. So I'm 18 years old. I'm a young woman, and now I can finally vote. But there's still a little bit more to this story. Even despite the breakthroughs in the civil rights era, there was a century-long struggle for inclusion of the Latinx community. The Lang provision of the 1965 Voting Rights Act allowed Puerto Rican citizens to use their Spanish language, but mainland Latinx were still denied the right to register in Spanish or to vote. When they went to vote, if they could fill out the English registration form, when they went to vote, they were given a literacy test. They said, if you can read this, you can vote. So it obviously limited the ability of those people who had a discomfort in using English as their first language. And this particularly was true in the Southwest. It wasn't until 10 years after the Civil Rights Act that this barrier began to erode. Exactly 1 decade after the Voting Rights Act followed several court battles on behalf of Latino Americans. And President Gerald Ford amended the act at that time to also end the discrimination of so-called language minorities. In 1974, the Southwest Voter Registration and Education Progress, which was the first and largest Latino voter participation organization, started operations. The founder was William Velasquez, and there were other Mexican political activists involved as well. Protecting the voting rights of Latinos, as well as citizens whose facility in English was limited, made it possible to translate registration materials into other languages and strengthen the political power of communities of color. The law in '75 was a critical contributor to the success and growth seen in Latino political groups. But the fight continues today. In 2013, the Supreme Court decision in Shelby County versus Holder struck at the heart of voting rights. At the core of the disagreement was whether racial minorities continued to face barriers to voting in states with a history of discrimination. Shelby County argued that the law was based on outdated information and that people of color no longer experienced voter suppression. It was a 5-4 ruling. And what it did was to say that states and localities with a history of suppressing voter rights no longer had to present any changes in voting laws to the U.S. Department of Justice. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the dissent, and she said, throwing out pre-clearance, which is what that review was, throwing out pre-clearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing out your umbrella because you're not getting wet underneath it in a rainstorm. Shelby opened the door to the return of voter suppression. By 2013, which was 5 years after the ruling, nearly 1,000 polling places in the United States had closed, many of them in predominantly African-American counties. There were also cuts to early voting, purges of voter rolls, and imposition of strict voter ID laws. And today, if you watch the news, you will see that such laws are continuing to be passed with an even greater impact on targeted groups of citizens. So the fight for the vote continues. There are still hurdles to overcome, still people wanting to prevent certain groups from voting. And unfortunately, even the Voting Rights Act did not end efforts to make it difficult or impossible for certain groups to vote. These are some of the ways that are happening today. Removing voters' names from the polls, closing polls, demanding IDs. There's a fight back now, though. H.R. 4, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, is one effort to turn back that tide. And the For the People Act, right now being considered, is another. In its original version of the House, the For the People Act seeks to restore voting rights of 1965. It also implements fair redistricting and ends gerrymandering. It expands voter registration by modernizing the system, and it creates new public financing laws. It's passed the House and is now in the Senate, which is working to create its own version. And if the Senate passes the bill, it will go to the president to be signed. But you'll need to keep an eye on the news to see as the history of suffrage continues to unfold. And I am missing my last slide, which is kind of a wrap-up slide that says, so of course, now that we've seen how hard it is to vote, everybody's going to turn out to vote. But what I'm going to ask, I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I'm going to ask you to put something in the chat for me. One of the things that I realized going through this is that it's way too wordy. I'm going to have to do something about that middle part where there's so much information about the various groups. So if you've got any suggestions for that, I would really appreciate it. It's information that I feel is critical, but kids are going to turn off listening to me read it like that. So that's one thing. But in the chat, would you put down, through the mind of an 18-year-old, I used to think, and complete that sentence stem, but now I think, and complete that sentence stem. I used to think.
And it's telling me the chat's disabled.
Me too.
Okay, try it now.
Yep, now it's there.
Good, thank you.
So what was the sentence again? I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. I used to think the wars mentioned were for other rights. I see it. But now I think I see how. Oh, your messages or your observations are really, they're really touching to me, because that is exactly what we're trying to get kids to realize, that it's been such a struggle for so many people over such a long period of time, and it's not ended. That's, you know, as a kid growing up, in fact, even as an adult, I can remember thinking, oh, well, you know, we're all set now. Everybody has a chance to vote. Maybe we should give 16-year-olds the right to vote. But it's nowhere near that. Rosemary, what do you, you'll need to unmute yourself.
So that's everything that you said and the stuff in the chat box. I believe is when you said that the middle of it was wordy,
Yes.
I disagree with that. And the reason why I disagree with that is because, especially in this environment where civics is not taught, I think that this is an opportunity to tell the correct story. So I think all of the points are relevant.
I agree. I did not find it. And I'm really trying to put myself in that 18-year-old frame. of
Yeah,
mind.
that's the tricky part.
I think one thing that could potentially be done is when you're talking about the suffragists, like the Native Americans, the Asian Americans, I'm just wondering, I don't know how you all would feel about this, if you pulled some personalities that fit that ethnic background from their popular culture now, and said, for instance, that means, I can't think of somebody, but, a popular artist or whatever would not be able to vote. You would be able to when you turned 18, but they wouldn't be able to. That kind of thing, like maybe bringing it, sprinkling that in when you went through the different groups, someone they could really relate to. I don't know.
Or maybe even ask the question so that it's interactive.
Yeah.
Because often they know, the 18-year-olds, they know the background and the ethnicity, etc., of the celebrities that they pay attention to.
Mhm.
So, that may be one way to do it. That's a good
Get them more
a good
engaged.
idea to make it more interactive. So, of the celebrities that you know today, who would this apply to, or something like that.
Yeah, so putting some kind of a break in there so there's interaction between the students and the presenter. Melissa, what do you think?
So what came to my mind as an idea is having a timeline
That's what I was gonna say,
the years,
Melissa.
and then having them guess which fit the year starting at the beginning. So when they guess that one in the beginning, then you could do a talking series. Then you bring them back to the slide again and have them pick, okay, which event happened next. When they pick the right one, you talk a little bit again. So that'll break up the you just talking as a presenter.
Melissa, that's exactly what I was going to say too, because I also need to see that timeline in my head to keep it all straight.
Yeah, that
So you're
would be-
talking about using it on a repetitive basis through each
Mhm.
one of the groups, all the way back to the Revolutionary War or just more recent history?
You could do it through the whole thing.
I would do it through the whole thing.
I agree.
be graphic.
I think that's an excellent idea in terms of the timeline, because it gives them an opportunity to visually see the length of time
The length of time,
it took to
exactly.
accomplish each piece.
Good point. Good
Oh,
point.
you're muted, Janice.
Janice,
I was raising my hand, wait for my turn.
you're so polite as an 18-year-old. I'm very impressed.
But I was also thinking if you had a slide that had the bullets of what that amendment covered, like, because you go through the talk and you go through what it covered and who it included, but just remember that, boom, 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 because I was having a hard time trying to remember. Wait a minute, so this is wait, who's included here? So just a quick, just remember, so then people are like, wait a minute, and it'll hit them before they get to the exercise, like, wait a minute, somebody's missing. That's all. That's what I'm thinking. I should have written it down in between what slides, but I guess I really liked it. I didn't think it was too wordy. I just really think that a slide to kind of remind them of what it is you brought up, just quick points, just a couple of bullets. Just remember, this amendment only covers boom, 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 boom. And then.
And maybe that could be added to the timeline.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm making notes furiously, as you can tell, because my head is not looking at you. great. So many people have contributed to this over the course of time that it's been developed. And we started this particular lesson probably in 2017. Peggy Dellinger taught it to a 5th grade class, and that was the beginning of it. I saw her teach it. I said, it's too good. You can't keep it to your granddaughter's 5th grade class. And so
Exactly.
It was really well done. And you're saying that that came about from the New Jersey group?
from Southern Monmouth County.
That is
Aren't you
so-
proud?
As a new member of 1 week, I'm really impressed. I mean, I think it's very well done. Yeah.
So do I.
I do too. Exciting. It's very exciting.
Thank you.
Pat, there's one more thing, and I don't know if you can put it in. I don't know if anything exists. Maybe I can even search for things, but just to break it up a little, some videos, a little video, 30-second video clip here and there.
That is a great idea. Remember I said right at the beginning, to those of you who weren't there, that these were the first programs that we had to translate to virtual mode. So they are pretty, streamlined, pretty much just, here's the story, here's the video, here's this, here's that.
Right.
And as we got into the second part, the fighting for change, it's much more interactive. So that's a really good point, Lori. If you can find some things, if anybody can find some little video clips, and generally they need to be 20 seconds or less, because that's how much the time span of attention is for kids who are looking at it. And, sometimes you can clip a piece too, to just the most impressive thing. I'll give you an example from the Fighting for Change. One of the clips that I took of a young person who is trying to make a difference in her own sphere was Naomi Osaka. And I took a clip from her Twitter account, which was literally 15 seconds. She said, the interviewer is saying, so, Naomi, you've worn a mask, a different mask every day. What were you trying to do? And she says, well, I think the question was more is what impact did it have on you? To have him answer the question for her. And so that's the kind of thing, something just really brief that could be put in there would be great if you find any. And I'll look too. It can always be improved. All right, any final comments on that before we move on to the next piece?
I love it, Pat.
I do too. I do too. I got a history lesson because half of that stuff, some of that stuff I didn't even remember. And that's why I was looking for those bullet slides, like, because I'm writing and I'm trying to write and listen, and I can't even read my writing now. So, but
Okay,
it was
well, this
great.
is the reason why it's recorded, because you will be able to go back to whichever little piece you need
Good.
to see, what you might have missed that you want to pick up on. I really appreciate your feedback, so thank you so much. Okay, I am going to share my screen again. And those of you who weren't on in the beginning, Lori has done a phenomenal job for me. When we first developed the second piece of this, which is about voter turnout, we only had 2016's turnout data. We've had 2 elections since then. We had the midterms and then we had the 2020 elections. And so the turnout has changed pretty dramatically. And I needed somebody to step in and do that for me, because it's really time consuming if you don't know what you're doing. And Lori said, well, that's my job. I can do that. And so I am so grateful to what she's done. I'm going to use now, not our finished version, and you'll see that because there's a slide missing that we recognized yesterday. But I think the rest of it is, a pretty clear example. And Lori, do you want to tell them what happened to you when you started to take a look at the program?
What happened, Pat?
What, you went down some rabbit holes?
Oh, yeah. So what's interesting is, so you'll see it's a bunch of numbers and statistics, and I love numbers and statistics. And as you guys probably all know, you can do anything with numbers and statistics and bend them any way you want. So Pat gives me this deck, says, go to the Census Bureau and find these numbers and update it. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I started looking. You can find these numbers anywhere you want, but they're not all the same. You can find them rolled up differently. So, I didn't really realize it, even though I was a census taker and I have filled out the census many years, that over time, how much the categories actually change. So it's hard to even compare year over year fairly because the time age ranges change and this and that change. Like, Pat, I don't know what you want me to say here. So I had to keep saying, let's meet for half an hour. Let's meet for half an hour. So we're trying to pull it together.
Right. And you'll see in some things, like one of the things that Lori and I said to her is that we need to have the same axes on comparative graphs, because otherwise it's very misleading when you're looking at them. And I'll show you one example where we still haven't made that change and ask you how it changes. Okay, I think you can see the PowerPoint presentation for Module 2. Am I correct?
Yes.
All right, good. All right, this time I'm using PowerPoint. So it is a little bit different, but when you look for this on the website, you'll see that the teacher's notes are still down below. But when you, and I can't show you, but when you use the presenter's notes, they will appear on the right-hand side of the screen, so you can see the entire screen. So let's take a look at this from the beginning. And again, I would talk about, who we are as the League of Women Voters, and emphasize in particular the fact that our presentations are designed to be issue agnostic, not lean one way or the other, but the kids don't have to do that. The kids can keep their own points of view.
Pat, could I just
Yes.
ask a question?
Sure.
How is this supposed to be presented? Do you do like 2 modules or at a time, or
That's a great question.
structured?
The modules are generally designed to fit into a 40-minute class period. During Module 1, you have to really race to get that in, but Module 2 fits pretty comfortably because there's a game at the end that can be longer or shorter, depending on what goes on. The other thing that your question brought up is that these can be presented in person as well as virtually, because that was how they were originally designed. So like when we have a breakout group in the classroom, you just break them into small groups. So it's pretty much parallels what you do in the classroom. In the timeline of suffrage, what we do is give kids the avatar cards. And in one group, we actually have them stand and create a physical timeline, which gets their bodies involved in what's going on. In another presentation, I strung a clothesline from one corner of the room to the other and gave, had clothespins on it. And as the kids were eligible to vote, they'd come up and they'd clip their avatar to the clothesline. But it's some kind of a visual representation for people. So it's not just trying to remember who's who. Okay, so here we go again. This is the, nonpartisan, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you've heard that. All right, so there's a question on the graph here. Write down for yourself what percentage of people who were eligible to vote you think actually voted in the last election, the 2020 election. Give you a couple of seconds. Okay, give me some ideas. What did you say? Mary Beth, what did you say?
Mine's going to be so off. I'm embarrassed to do it because I can't remember.
I don't want to embarrass you, so we'll skip you. Janice, what did you say?
It said 80%. I was being generous.
Okay, Rosemary, how about you?
I said 50.
How about you, Melissa?
I went really low. I said 17%.
And how about you, Lori?
I'll just go 45%.
Okay. This is the actual turnout in 2020. 66%, 66.7% actually voted in this last election. But believe me, it was not always that way. Are you surprised? Okay, I see heads shaking. Okay, this is the teacher side of me talking. There are a lot of graphs in this presentation. And so in the beginning, I make an effort to make sure that kids know how to read a graph and to read it correctly and not make assumptions from the visual part that are inaccurate. So in this case, across the bottom, you'll see that the years are 6 years apart. So we go from 1916 to 1922 to 1928. That means sometimes you're seeing the results of a midterm election and sometimes the result of a presidential election. You'll notice that up the vertical axis, this does not begin at 0 and it does not end at 100. So what happens when you see only a portion of the graph like that is that sometimes it appears the results are exaggerated. But my question to you today, based on this graph, is what do you notice about the turnout between presidential elections, which is the purple line at the top of the graph, and midterm elections at the bottom of the graph? And if we're in person, I just ask kids in the classroom. This virtual format, we can either have people volunteer or you can ask kids to put what they would say into the chat. And what I'm looking for is the difference between what they determine from what the graph actually says and what they say that's actually an assumption based on what they see in the graph, because that's the next step in helping them understand graphing or the graphs. So just tell me something that you observe from looking at the graph that you see. Rosemary?
That people tend to participate more often in national versus local elections.
Good one. What else? And you don't have to raise your hand. You can just call out.
The two lines sort of follow each other, even though they're widely spaced apart. Generally, they have the same ups and downs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else you notice? How about the 2018? The midterm election in 2018, what
Yeah,
happened?
well, a lot of people voted.
Certainly compared to the term before that, yeah.
Yeah.
And anything else that you can notice from looking at that? Look at some of the dates at the bottom and then look at the height or depths of the graph. All right, I'm going to ask you to look at 1965.
Oh,
You know what? It appears to me that that the high points are when some event is or incident is occurring at that time.
Good observation. Is that a thing that the data says for sure, or is that an assumption?
That is an assumption.
Good, and that's exactly what I would use to help kids realize that that's probably a pretty good assumption because of the way, not just 1965 era, but also look back at let's say 1938 to 43. What was going on then? It was the World War II. So at that time also, there was a lot of participation in voting. In 2018, the participation in the election shot up again. And yes, there were issues in our nation at that time. So what might you, if you had a trend line, what might you expect to have happen on that graph in the 2020 election?
drop. If going by the trend,
Mm-hmm.
it would have dropped. It would have dropped because we don't have 2 points up together. Basically, it would. I think it would have been. It would from 2018 to 2020.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been a dip.
Okay.
No?
Anybody else?
I would think.
I disagree.
Okay, what do you think?
I think that the numbers went up. Oh no, wait a minute. Going into 2020. Yes, I agree. Sorry, I changed that. I agree. I think that there would have been a dip because less voters people were apathetic.
In 20,
2020.
I'm gonna say, I think it went up because of the big push for mail-in. I would think 2020 went up. And that's how the election turned out the way it did.
For the big push for what?
Mail-in, the ability to mail in.
But it did go up because you showed us before, right? What was it, 67% or something voted?
okay, well, let's go on. We can find out more.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's break it down a little bit because there are people who have the power as a result of having the vote. This is, again, I'm going to help the kids look at the graph. This is voter turnout by age. So this is the 18 to 24-year-old age group, which will be their age group. The dates at the bottom of the graph go from 2000 to 2020, which is essentially the number of years that they've been alive. And the numbers up the side this time go from 0 to 100. So you're going to see a better perspective or a more accurate perspective. What do you notice? Oh, also, this is presidential and midterm elections. So 2000 was a presidential election, 2002 was a midterm, 2004 was presidential, 2006 was midterm. So again, take a look at the graph and tell me some of the things you know for sure from looking at that, or some of the assumptions that you can make when you look at that.
People were really motivated for the midterm elections, which we saw in the other one in 2018. I mean, so much higher than the other. Well, this is a combination though of both, right?
Yeah.
But there was no presidential election in 2018. So yeah, that's midterm. Look
Oh,
at
you're
the-
right. When you said the turnout in the midterm
so
is
much greater.
higher than it's ever been. You're correct when you said that.
So much greater.
That's a piece of data, the piece of information that is based on the data and the graph. Now, you could make an assumption based on that piece of data. What might the assumption be?
The
Well,
person getting out and voting.
people were either really upset or really happy.
Yeah, so you get the idea. And that's what you would want the kids to begin to distinguish between what assumptions they might be making and what the facts are, because we want to help them get to the point where they realize they have to find reliable information and not jump to conclusions about what that piece of information is telling them. And that's a theme that runs through all of the programs from now on. Okay.
Because it's almost like if they make an assumption, that's why that might keep some people home at the polls.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those
Oh, there's
incorrect
lots of
assumptions.
things.
Yeah, right.
Lots of things that can happen. The other thing on this graph is that there is a line through the middle of it, which is called a trend line.
Mhm.
And so the other question I say to them is, if you look at the trend line, what observations can you make? What's happening in voter turnout?
I think this is an interesting one, and I know you and I've played with this trend line thinking it's wrong as well as you thought maybe it's wrong. Because when I look at it, and it's because the numbers go up and down, it really hasn't changed all that much. It certainly is an upward trend. But
Mhm.
if I look at where it started in 2000, it's what, a little under 30% turnout. And we're rising up to maybe 35%.
Yeah.
So it's really, it hasn't changed a heck of a lot. I mean, it looks good, it's going up, but is 5% a lot?
And
Well,
you know
it's in the
what?
right direction, right?
Exactly. And let's make it go more.
You know, and to me, looking at it, it appears that, again, more come out to the presidential elections. And in terms of 2018, there was some concern. I'm going to say I'll say interest in this age group for the midterm,
Mhm.
for the midterm change, because this is just for me looking at this. the midterm, it appears that the midterm numbers are low.
Mhm.
It's almost like if there's no concern for the midterm or local or lower elections.
Right. Right.
So that's the point of this slide, is to, I know not to spend a whole lot of time on it, but to show them that the data, like, yeah, what exactly is the purpose of this slide? I guess is my
The
question.
purpose of the slide is to let them know that they can find out some things they can be pretty certain about, like midterm turnout is generally lower than
Okay,
presidential turnout. That you can see trends in data.
okay,
Right.
okay.
That and sometimes the kids will pick out, and I love this, they'll say, look at this, in 2008 it was 48.4% that turned out for the presidential election, and in 2020 it was 48.8%. And I'll say to them all, why do you think that's the case?
Uh-huh.
And very often they'll say, oh, I know who was being elected in 2008. So
Yeah.
things like that, it's interesting to see how their minds work, but the essential
Okay.
point is to get them to realize that there are things you can tell pretty certainly from data, but you have to be cautious, and there are things that there are assumptions people make about data that you really have to be cautious about, because it's not always correct.
Okay, and the source for this data will be where, for us to tell them where they can look for themselves?
That's Lori's job.
Oh, okay. So
It will wind up being on the slides when we're done.
Okay.
Good point. Okay, so we're going to see a series of slides now that build. The first series is going to be based on age, and this one is people in your age group, but you're going to watch that, and that's called your cohort. Your age group is your cohort. But this slide shows the turnout among people from 18 to 24 in presidential elections from 2000 through 2020. Now we're going to add the 25 to 44-year-old people. Now the 45 to 64-year-old people. And then there will be a slide with the 65 and over. And the 65 and over is just slightly north of, it's just slightly higher than the 45 to 64-year-olds. Okay, take a few seconds and make a note for yourself on a piece of paper about something that you notice about the turnout by age. I'll wait about 15 seconds. Okay, and you're going to use what you observe in breakout groups later. So you probably will have more than one thing on your mind. I would suggest you write down as many as you can come up with, so you have a lot to share in the group. Okay, we're going to look at the same turnout, but this time we're going to look at it by gender. In the US Census Bureau, which provides us with the data that we've used in these slides, when they determine voter turnout, they've used only two genders in the past, only male and female. And in the 2020 census, that continued. There's been a discussion that the US Census should no longer just use the binary male-female to ask for gender, that a category known as other should be added to the form. In 2018, the Census Equality Act would add questions to the census asking respondents about their sexual orientation and gender identity. The bill was read twice in the session and referred to the Department of Homeland Security, and it died there. So it's the same still, and unless somebody takes action, it will be the same male-female in 2030. But let's take a look at gender. By gender, 18 to 24-year-old women turned out this way. And by gender, 18 to 24-year-old men turned out this way. Make an observation, stop and jot it on your piece of paper there so you can use it in discussion. Okay, now we're going to look at race and ethnicity. There were categories that included, there was an other category in the census, and that used to include Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, Pacific Islanders, Asian Americans, and Native Hawaiians. The 2020 census compressed that and just has a category known as Asians. So that's what Lori was talking about, where we had to figure out what to do with the data. But we've done the best that we can, so we'll see. This is a slide that you can hide as a presenter or not hide. You can decide whether to use it, and sometimes I make that decision based on the population of the school in which I'm presenting. Notice again, there's a 6-year spread along the bottom of the axis, so it represents presidential and non-presidential elections, but the points on the data line represent actual elections. So if I use this with kids, I point that out again. All right, in Fighting for the Vote, the timeline of suffrage, we learned that the voting population in the United States originally was all white landowning men over 21. And we saw that the voting population change over time in our avatar game. And our electorate has become more representative of our actual adult population over time. Now, what you're looking at also here, you have to realize that this is not representative of 0 to 100%. So my first question to the kids is, what might be, what distortion might happen when you look at only a part of this graph? What might you think when you look at it? If the top were 100% and the bottom were 0.
Yeah, that would be very dramatic. Way
Yeah.
more dramatic.
Right. And when you look at the actual percentages on the side, it's still dramatic, but it's not as dramatic as what you might assume if you didn't look at the axes. So you want to make sure that they realize that that's only a portion of it. Right. But let's look at this. In today's world, it also means that our actual adult population continues to change. Since 1984, the minority population has increased. And Lori has a slide that we're going to replace this one with, which also includes the other minorities. So this little pie piece will be larger, but still, when you look at the white proportion of the population in this graph, and what did we say, Lori? This was 2013, right?
Yep.
Okay. In 2013, the white percentage of the population that was voting was 83%, and minorities only represented 17%. In this last election, 71% only of the population was white, and the rest was minority. So the minority vote is definitely growing. And I lost my place. Sorry about that. Okay, so at any rate, when the pie slice changes, what does that mean about voting? It means that if you are a member of one of those minority groups, your voice is increasing. And if you're a member of the white group, your voice is decreasing. And that, if you want to make some assumptions, you can think about how that might impact people's feelings about what should be done about voting rights. And I think that's reflected in some of what's going on today.
So Pat, question. Obviously, we don't give our opinion on, what's going on and all. We listen, et cetera, et cetera. But what if a heated conversation comes up in the class? How do you diffuse it, or what do you say to move on?
Good question. One of the things that we make a point of right up front is that everybody is entitled to his or her own opinion. And it is true for them. It does not mean that it needs to be true for you, that it is your way of looking at the world. And in our democracy, it is important for us to be respectful of the opinions of someone else and to listen, to try to understand, not necessarily change your own point of view, and to speak in a way that is not going to inflame a situation. So rather than get into a crazy discussion here, let's remember that it's important for us to listen and try to be respectful and to speak and try to be respectful. And then we move on. And there is actually a lesson in Fighting for Change that is specifically addresses and gives students some of those skills. So that's something that we can also pass on to teachers.
I think the way we word it too, when we say their voices are getting smaller and the other voices are getting larger, if there's a way to word it so that people think something's getting taken away, make it more inclusive, I think that would help. Because it's a spin when you were like, their voices are getting, some people might get a little defensive about that.
Good point. If you've got any suggestions, you send them along to me afterwards. Yeah, Melissa.
I have another suggestion. You want me to send you an email?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Unless you want to share it now, I'm sure everybody else would be listening too.
Just the word minority, I feel that instead of using minority, we should be using white and non-white, so that there's not any kind of perception of one's greater than or less than.
I agree.
Got it.
And
Good point.
and to Janice's point, perhaps it can just be as a result of population growth. The term can be the growth of the population
Okay,
in that last slide.
thank you.
I think that last slide's probably the most contentious one if you really think about it.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why I said initially that, oh, this one, no,
Yeah.
this was the one I said initially, sometimes I hide the slide and I don't even bring it. If I know that that's going to really raise some hackles, I'm less inclined to use it. I suppose I could say the same thing.
Yeah, but this is the one I'm speaking about.
Right.
Yeah, that's
the
what I was
one
thinking
that
too.
Janice commented on, I believe. But I'm just saying that in terms of the growth of population growth, this is how it's looking now, as opposed to growth of non-white, and that I think that that's where it appears that something is being taken away.
Great.
Yeah, yep. And to, I think it was Melissa's point here, it says since 1984, the minority population has increased. And yes, it's true, it is a minority, but I think there could be a negative connotation there, maybe.
Absolutely.
That's a good call.
I'll attest to that.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you. This slide is, or this series of slides is going to be based on race and ethnicity. And the Census Bureau considers Hispanic or Latino as an ethnicity and not as a race, because they believe that you can be Black and Hispanic, white and Hispanic. And so they've broken those categories down this way. Again, we're looking at 2000 to 2020. This is your age group, or this is the non-Hispanic white category. And you're going to be comparing that to some of the other groups. This adds non-Hispanic Blacks. This adds Hispanic. And this adds Asian. Okay, and then the last group, or the last cohort we're going to look at is by education level. This line represents students or people with less than a high school or a GED diploma, the turnout. This adds those who are high school graduates, but no further than that. This adds people who have some college or an associate's degree, all the way up to a bachelor's degree, but not beyond. And this adds graduate, people with a graduate degree. So okay, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and I'm going to ask you to share what you've written down with the other people in your group, and then ask one person to be a reporter. There you go. So,
Okay.
I know that we all pushed to come back, but then
Yeah.
something happened and they went back.
They
let's
got
see.
kicked out of the class? Oh,
I think they cut class.
Yeah. We got everybody. Okay, who can share what the discussion was like in their particular group? Who's in charge?
I'm not in charge, but I was voted to be the scribe,
Okay.
or voluntold to be the scribe. So the May, I hope I got this right, ladies, but the younger age group was the only one increasing, which of course should be of interest to them, should make them feel energized, I hope. The more educated, the more participation in voting. Men are less participative than women. And Asian Americans had the greatest increase. And I couldn't tell, was the African American line static and the other two were a little bit increased, or did I see that wrong?
I don't think that's what the slide show.
Okay, I couldn't tell which were.
We'll go back to
Okay.
that.
Doesn't matter, but the main call out, I think, is that the Asian American had the greatest increase, that
Okay,
sector.
okay. How about the other group?
I wasn't in charge either, but one of the things that was outstanding in terms of feedback is on the age groups slide. Both Melissa and I had different takes on that slide.
Interesting.
And I looked at it as philosophy of the age groups and why they voted, right? Because the older group was the highest level, and then the youngest group was the lowest level. So when I saw that, I looked at it as the older folks knew it was very important to vote because of the history of the vote, of getting to where we are today. And Melissa saw it as, speak up, Melissa, speak.
When I looked at it, I looked at the trend of what age groups. So with the younger group increasing more, it was really interesting that when her and I got to the room, automatically we both had just looked at the graph in a completely different lens. And I thought that was a really interesting thing of this activity.
It is.
So that's why we're bringing that up.
I'm glad that you did. When you go back to the discussion that we had in the beginning about the difference between what you can be pretty sure of in terms of when you look at a graph and what is an assumption based on a graph that you see, I think what's happening here is that one of you is looking through one of those lenses and one is looking through the other lens. Doesn't mean one is right and one is wrong. It's just different. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That's interesting that it happened. Did you come up with any other observations based on what you saw on the graphs?
Not on that one.
Okay, but how about any of them?
Well, we had different observations on
That's good.
the gender one too.
That's
the
good.
men and the
Tell
women.
us. What'd you come up with?
Melissa, you.
So my observation was really just about the data in general as we move into a world that's more accepting of non-binary identification. I was like, oh, it only says male and female. So that's automatically what I fixated on. And Rosemary, you want to share what your thoughts were?
My observation on that slide was that there are oftentimes there are women who will vote the way their male counterparts tell them to vote.
Okay. I love this. I love sharing like this. I learn every time we do it. How about any of the other sets of slides? Did you have any observations, or did you get all tied up in your discussion on those two, which must have been fascinating?
Yeah, that was as far as we
Yeah,
got.
I
that
should
was
have
it,
dropped
'cause
in
we-
on you and
we
just
didn't even
listened on
comment on the education one.
Okay.
I think one of the things that we talked about actually is exactly what Melissa and Rosemary were saying, is how do you talk about the numbers without making the assumptions? Because we were trying not to make the assumptions, but that's the exciting part about it.
That is. And it's not that you should not make assumptions.
Right.
That's okay. But you
Yeah,
have to be realistic and say, well, somebody else might make a different assumption based on the same information. And that's exactly what happened to Melissa and to Rosemary. So that was really a good thing for us to hear you come up with. So thank you. Grateful for that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Rosemary, what I kept on observing, and I think you made the assumption that kind of resonates with me on the male-female one, or the men-women one, whatever we called it. The rows were almost identically spaced and identical movement. So I wonder what percent of, like you said, that the female, even though they vote more, are going along with whoever their counterpart is. Because out of all of them, that's what I saw there. Interesting.
Yes.
You know,
And
I
you
thought
know
it was-
what, this conversation is bringing, for me, is bringing to the forefront that I cannot, or I should not, make assumptions based on things that I know. Like, I should not be. I should try to be not biased but tainted, because I've often spoken to couples who have shared that.
Mhm. I'd like to
I'm
give you a
close to
big
him 'cause
hug
that's what
right
he
now.
said. So
So Pat, I have another question. In this type of exercise, do you ever have not suggestions, examples of assumptions? Like if the kids aren't really participating, do you ever say, like, you could look at this graph and say that it looks like men follow what the women do, or women follow what the men do, because they track, so like you were saying. Or you could, I'm wondering if they aren't really participating, like drawing a couple of options of things that people could see in each of them, so that they sort of start getting it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. I've never been in a situation where that happened.
Oh, good.
Kids generally at this point get very involved.
Okay, good.
And wind up getting in discussions like we are when they come back together.
Okay, good.
And it's always rewarding. But nobody's been quite as perceptive as this group.
The lines were just so blah. Like, I expected to see some peaks and some, and they were just, and especially when Hillary was running, right? I was like, looking like, hey, where's that
Good point.
peak?
It gives you
Nothing.
some perspective on your own point of view when you
Right.
actually look at something like that. So, yeah. Okay, let's go back to being kids, and let's see if I can go back to the right graph here. Okay. I think I am. I'm waiting for my little presenter view screen to pop up.
You know what? I just caught myself, so I would have to be careful when I actually name a candidate, because I don't want to appear that I was in support of that candidate at all.
Right. Right.
But I would
As a
be-
lead person, very
Yeah.
definitely have to be careful of that.
Yeah.
You can say it with us, but school administration sometimes get pretty upset. I can remember I live in Neptune Township, and one of the first schools that we presented in was the high school there. as a real presentation, not as a pilot. And the superintendent, who is a friend, said to me, you know what? So one of my board members said to me, we've got to make sure that we get somebody on the right in too, because the League of Women Voters is a left or organization of the left. So it's really important that we get our branding out there that that's not the case, that we are a nonpartisan organization. And that's, you know, I'll leave it there. You just need to remember that. Okay, so you have been in small groups. So who's making the decisions? Well, it turns out that historically, the older you are, the wider you are, and the more education you have, the more likely it is that you'll vote, and the more likely it is that you will be making the decisions for the rest of us. So voter turnout turns out to be a big deal. Even in the highest turnout groups like mine, really a quarter of the people who are eligible to vote choose not to vote. And among 18 to 24-year-old people, the record's awful. So the greatest percentage of increase this year was among young voters. Even among young voters, only half of those who were eligible to vote actually turned out to vote. So did you ever wonder why the people in Washington look like old white men? Could be the point. And if you want the politicians to make the decisions that you want them to make, then you have to get involved and you have to elect people who reflect your own values. Is there change ahead? And the answer to that is perhaps. Voter turnout did increase in 2020 in what appears to be an election with historically high overall turnout rate for the entire electorate. The fact is that the youth share was even a higher turnout. And the thing that just tickles me no end is that when you compare state by state youth voter turnout, New Jersey had the highest, the greatest increase in voter turnout among 18 to 24-year-olds. We had a 67% turnout among our young voters, which is amazing. So will it continue? Let's look at your age group and ethnicity specifically. Who can be most helpful in encouraging more young people like you to get out to vote? You. You're the ones who are most likely to influence others your age to vote. And when I'm working with older groups, I usually say, sorry, mom, sorry, grandma, sorry, teacher. You're a good role model, but you're not going to be the one to convince young people to do what you think they should do. It's their peers that have the greater influence. So if that's the case, how can young people your age influence others to vote? What can you say and why does it work? All right, well, one of the things you can say is you try to make it the norm. So you say something like, oh, you know, we're all going to vote, so come on with us. Kids want to be a part of the group, and so if everybody else is doing it, they're more likely to do it. The other thing you can do is watch the wording that you use, and we've talked a lot about that today. Wording is really important. So what we want them to do is to identify as something. So we want to emphasize calling them voters rather than telling them they should have to vote, because a vote is a one-time thing. Being a voter is an identity. The third thing we can do is work on commitment issues. I don't know about you, but my New Year's resolutions, you know, like I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to go on a diet. It works for a while, but if I don't have a really specific plan, those things kind of fall by the wayside. So it is important for kids to ask other kids, so how are you going to get to the polls? Do you need a ride? My mom's going to drive us. Or what time are you going to go? Do you want to go with me? I'm going to have to go after work, or something like that. So get them to actually make a plan in order to get to the polls. And then follow up, because kids don't like to let one another down. So if they say something like, I'll text you on election day and see whether or not you got out there, or, you know, we can watch the results together afterwards. Nobody likes to let a friend down, and so they're much more likely to be inclined to go out and vote. Now, those 4 things I'm going to ask you to try to remember, because you're going to use them when we play a game in a slide or two. All right. So there are lots of reasons why people don't vote. All kinds of things can interfere with your ability to vote, but in some cases, not all, even people who could go, who don't have real reasons, just have excuses, don't turn out to vote. And so the last thing that we're going to do is to try to do something about the excuses. We're going to play a game that will let you and your fellow learners learn responses they can give to the typical excuses that can be given by 18 to 24-year-olds. I sent you an excuse. You had a number. Is there anybody who does not have their excuse? Okay, Melissa, let me see if I can do this.
Yeah, for some reason, when I went back to find my email, everything got deleted.
Oh, that was the excuse card?
Yep, that was the excuse card.
Okay.
All right, so Melissa, I gave you number 6. So this is your excuse. The week before election, you'll receive a sample ballot in the mail. Your sample ballot lists your polling place. You can also find your polling place by going to vote411.org. Do you want to go with me to the polls? We're in the same district. Oh, that's the response. Sorry, here's your excuse. I don't know where to go to vote in my town. Okay, anybody else need their excuse, or are we all set? All right, Mary Beth. All right, this is. Okay, all right, so this is how we're going to do it. You need to think of the way you would respond to somebody who says this to you, says this excuse to you. So mine is, my vote's largely symbolic because of the Electoral College. I live in a blue state. So I need to come up with an answer to that.
You know what? I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry. I found it. Okay.
Okay, all right. So once I have the answer to that in my mind, then I don't answer it for you. I'm going to call on one of you, and you've got to come up with the answer that you would give if I use that as my excuse. So again, my excuse was, and I tell the kids that they have to read it aloud first before they call on somebody so that everybody listens. So my vote is largely symbolic because of the Electoral College. I live in a blue state, so it doesn't matter. Lori, what would you say to me if I said that excuse to you?
That is my excuse as well, by the way.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But that's okay. But what I would say to you is, one thing I would say to you is, well, there's power in numbers. You vote, you'll get other folks to vote. Something I wouldn't say, and I don't know if we should say, is just because it's a blue state, you know, here's where we cross the lines, right? Just because it's a blue state, you know, we want to show we're blue and we want to show strength, but do we also want to say your red partners? We also want to get them out to vote.
Well,
You
as
know,
a league
how do we go that way?
person, saying both is a better thing. If you're talking to me and I'm giving you an excuse, you can just say what you said. And then it's my job, if I think your answer is incomplete, I can add a little bit to that, or I can ask if anybody else has something that they want to add to it. Now, I'm going to add to it that that is true when you think about the national elections, because the Electoral College sometimes makes it appear as if it doesn't matter which way we vote. But even in the national elections, we are voting for assembly people and we are voting for other representatives. And so if we don't get out to vote, those other people are not elected if we think they're the ones that we want them to represent us. So it is important to get out to vote. You know, yeah, that's a limitation of the Electoral College, but let's go. And then, like I said, if anybody else had something they wanted to add, but that, when I called on Lori and I put her on the spot, she now gets to read an excuse, think about the answer, and then ask somebody else. So you want me to give you a new excuse, Lori?
Sure, unless anyone wants to add to Pat's, which now could be mine.
I'm looking for a short one for you.
I got a question. So with the Electoral College now, I'm trying to rack my brain. Even if we are a blue state, and let's say a whole lot of people have that same way of thinking, and they're like, well, why bother vote? There's a good chance that the red people in the state win, because they might show up more than the blue. So
Yeah, and that's part of it, right? And because then you've got the popular vote and that whole discussion on popular
Yes.
versus electoral vote.
Good points. Okay, so I think what you can hear happening is that kids are getting not just one point of view about how you might answer that question, and they've got those solutions if somebody says it to them. But if that's a question or if that's an excuse in their own mind, they're also having somebody challenge that for them. Okay, Lori, how about if I give you, if the election is close, well, that's similar to what we just said. If somebody came along who excited me, I'd vote, but if I don't like the candidates, I'm just gonna stay home.
Okay, so I'm not going because there's nobody out there that's exciting me, or, yeah, anyway, I read it nicely.
Okay, and you get to pick somebody. You pick. Okay, you can pick on somebody.
Let's see. Janice, you look like you have a big cloud above your head. You're looking up there.
trying to look away, so you know.
Just like a kid. Doesn't work.
As a teacher in a past life, hey.
You know. Okay, so I would say, but by you not voting, you're actually voting, because somebody else is taking your you're actually voting for. Let me think about that here. By you not voting, you're giving somebody else your power, right, to vote. And if you don't like any of the candidates, you have no say in anything that happens afterwards. At least if you vote, and you have a shot at putting somebody better in office than the candidate who ends up, and then you might have something to say about that, or educate yourself, or maybe encourage people to, you know, participate or listen to the candidates forums, or but how do you say, I mean, that's difficult.
And I'll put you in my back
Can I-
pocket though to
can I
use you for
jump in there?
answers.
Yeah.
I was thinking, if you said that to me, I probably would say, well, tell me what you dislike about each candidate, and try to get them into, try to get you into discussion. Because oftentimes, and you know, I might hear that as an excuse, but that's because you really haven't paid attention to to what the issues were, and you're just trying to get rid of me. So my response would be, oh really? Well, what is it about them that you're not energized about? And which of the two or three do you like the best? Why don't you go vote for that one? You know, after the discussion, you know.
You're not marrying them, right?
Right, yeah.
You
Right.
just need the better of the two.
And if they say, well, they're saying that if they don't see one they like, well, what are the things that you're looking for, I guess, to get them to kind
yeah,
of pinpoint on what they want, and then find somebody closest to it. Yeah. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah, I like the idea of educating oneself, and I also like Pat's first answer to the first question of there's other people, we're always so focused on the top of the line. There's other people on that ballot.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You know,
and I
one
would
of-
even,
one of the-
when you're asking people,
sorry.
what do you like or what you don't like? I might even center it around their issues, right? So what issue are you most concerned about when it
Mhm.
comes to, when you think about presidential candidates? And then from there, you can go into the discussion about where the candidates stand on the issues. That way you're not making it a personality-based decision.
Right. Yeah, but
That's
it
right.
definitely can't, it's not a quick answer that you kind of have to follow up with people who give you that kind of a response.
Mhm. But at least you open the conversation and you don't let them just say, oh, that's the reason I'm not going to go. So that's good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
Janice, was it you or was it Rosemary?
Yes.
Yeah, it was Janice.
Yes. Okay. So I tried to vote last time, but the lady told me I voted by mail when I hadn't. She wouldn't let me vote.
Okay.
So who's supposed to answer that now?
Oh,
Well,
I gotta
Janice
pick
gets to
somebody.
call on somebody, right?
Oh,
Okay, Rosemary.
Rosemary.
Rosemary, I'm
There's
sorry.
no Rosemary here. I
You're
can't-
right. No,
You're right.
Rosemary. I'm sorry.
So
Rosemary.
my response would be I didn't vote by mail, but I would like a paper ballot for now because I want to vote while I'm here right now.
So
That
that's
would
what
be
you
my
tell them.
answer.
Okay, so if somebody tries to vote at the polls and they're told that no, you voted by mail already, you tell them you want a paper ballot to vote now? Is that what
Yeah,
that's
it's
what you
Yes.
tell them?
it's called a provisional ballot.
Provisional. Okay. Right.
Provisional ballot.
And
Thank you.
they have to give it to you. Sometimes
right.
poll workers will not tell you that you have the right to a provisional ballot. But what
Okay.
happens with those is that you get to vote, and then once the tally of the all the other ballots is finished, if there is a greater number, so meaning that the provisional ballots were actually valid, then they count the provisional ballots, and that's included in the total ballot count.
So somebody could conceivably vote twice then.
Yeah. Especially this year, it was an interesting process. So anyway, okay. Rosemary, you get to ask your question.
Oh, okay. Where was the one that I wanted? Here it is. My faith in the system and fairness in voting is utterly crushed. So why should I vote? That's my
Okay, you get to pick somebody.
okay. Maribeth?
You're muted. You're muted, Maribeth.
I called you Rosemarie. Just to
Thank
make
you.
sure I got it. The first thing I'd do is acknowledge that, yeah, I totally get that. I totally get that you feel totally crushed, that I do too, about the things that have happened, but it's just not going to it's not going to change if we don't get out there and do something. I mean, do you want to stay feeling like this, or do you want to have the hope that we can at some point, inch by inch, move along? Somebody help me out. That's what I would say to my daughter, but help me out. That wasn't anything sophisticated, but
That's okay. Rosemary, you want to answer your to that answer?
Oh, sure. So my response to that is why what has happened that has crushed your faith in the system, and that you mentioned that you were utterly
yeah.
crushed, and what do you think that you can do about, because there may be other people out there that think like you, so what do you think you can do to put the faith back into the process? And
That's
I
good.
would get into that type
Good.
of
Because, you know,
discussion.
my unconscious bias came into, I get that you're crushed. Because I was crushed then too, or whatever. You know, that's too much of my opinion coming into it because I could identify with
No,
it.
no, no, no. It's a good communication strategy to reflect what you've heard the other person say. So don't apologize for that. Do
Well,
that.
it's empathy, but I'm such a question asker. I'm very curious. I ask a lot of questions, and I like the fact that you know, really turned it to gain more information about what was it that was the most crushing to you about it, that's turned you away from voting. That's very troubling to me, you know. I thought that
Good
was good.
opener. Good. Great. Okay. And what's your question?
Mine is, why should I vote for a party that doesn't do anything for me? Or was it person? I guess it was person. Why should I vote for a person who doesn't do anything for me? Or it could be party, either one. Because it's just apathy and frustration with the whole election process.
Okay.
So
I think
why should I? And I can't remember who. Have you not answered, Melissa? I can't remember. You haven't? Okay. So
I
why should
have
vote-
not.
Why should I vote for a party that doesn't do anything for me, Melissa?
So apathy's hardest thing ever to deal with. So a lot of the time, I guess I would respond, and are you sure they're really not doing anything for you, and kind of try to center it back to issue based versus person based. Or even party based, right? What's your issue? Let's, if you get people to think about what their issue is, what their passion is. So, you know, something like, okay, what issue concerns you the most? And let's see if we can find out where do the people stand on it, right? Where do each candidate stand on it? That one to me though requires a long conversation, right? Apathy is really such a kind of masquerader of other things that you sometimes have to get deep into what people are really thinking and feeling.
good. You want to
Yeah, I
add
thought
anything?
that was great.
Yeah.
I really like, a couple of you all have talked about turning everything back to issue. And I think that's a really, really effective thing to do with these folks who are apathetic or disappointed in the system or whatever, is to, I can't remember, somebody else said it a few minutes ago, but it's to ignite that thing in them again that they're most interested in. I think that's really good.
I would piggyback Melissa with saying, well, for the moment, don't think party, think candidate. So which of those candidates, the 5, the 6, the 2 candidates, best match what's important to you?
Mhm.
And you know, discuss it from that perspective. Because at the end of the conversation, in my mind, would be, so then that's the person you should vote for. I wouldn't even get involved, you know, with party, because I think that that's personally in this classroom,
It's
I think
inflammatory.
that's part of the problem today. Is that herd mentality with the you know, I just vote down the line kind of thing. And so I would certainly uh, you know, go into, I hear what you're saying, you know, your party's not doing anything, but right now I don't want to talk about party. I want to talk about the people who are running, you know, the candidate, so and so and so and so, because your vote is important. So let's talk about the candidates that best match what your thoughts are.
I actually heard this a lot in the 20 election. I heard this a lot about Joe Biden. I mean, we're amongst friends here. I'm just saying that, you know, I would talk to so many Democrats who would say, I don't know, he just doesn't excite me. I don't know if he's got, you know, that was I heard that so much. I didn't agree with it because he was my senator once and I've always loved him. But I just heard that recently in the 2020 election a lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, my son, my youngest son, why I'm not voting. told me he's not gonna vote. I said, well, if you're gonna live here, you're gonna vote.
Now,
like that.
that's an answer that I can say.
I like that motivator.
That's great.
I'll do
Melissa,
it.
do you want to ask your question?
Sure, we kind of discussed it already though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was, I don't know where to go to vote.
Okay, and that's something like, okay, you live in a district, you got a sample ballot in the mail. On the sample ballot, it tells you where your voting district is, so it tells you right where to go. If you don't know, you can go on the New Jersey votes, or if you're in Monmouth County, you can go on Monmouth County votes, and I think other counties have the same thing, and you can find out exactly.
411.org.
411.org too. The only problem with 411.org is that when they go there, like we tell them to go for candidate information, we're having a really hard time getting local candidates to provide the information on that. So what you're saying, go to find the information about where to vote, is a good thing. There's also a really good first-time voters checklist on that website, that if you're
Yes.
working with young people in schools, that's a good thing to have available for them to
Which
make sure-
website is that with the
It's-
checklist?
411.org. It's the league website that
Vote 411.org.
vote for one. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Good.
No, I think that a lot of these issues could be resolved if we did promote more of the candidates forums, and especially for our local elections, and a lot of these websites that give people guidance on what to do. I think a lot of people don't know because the word isn't out, you know?
Mhm.
I agree with you, and that's something that I have been promoting in terms of vote411.org, to Pat's comment about how the candidates don't respond. They don't respond because they don't believe that the voter is going there to see what's being said.
Mhm.
If they knew that the individual voter was visiting that site, they would respond. The candidates would respond to it.
Yeah. When
Oh, it's
when I work in schools, I also tell kids just to go to their website, the candidate's website, so that they can see what the candidate is saying about himself or herself.
That's
So
a good, yeah.
I
good idea.
interrupted somebody. Who was it?
Oh, no, I was just going to say what's interesting is we're saying that candidates are not putting their stuff out on websites or whatever. And I know that's a generalization, but if we want to attract the younger folks, you're going to be on Twitter or on a website where they can search it.
Mhm. And I
Yeah,
think
so-
in part, that's what's happening. I think the energy is going into Instagram and Twitter and that sort of thing, rather than something that's been established by old white ladies.
Something black.
Here's my concern with. I agree with all of that, especially with the younger voter who is electronically prone. That's the way I like to say it, because they do tablets and Instagram and but where I'm falling short in that is the inability to compare. And
Yes.
so if I go to your individual site and I hear what you're saying on your site, and now I have to go to the other candidate site if there's 3 candidates,
Mhm.
the ability to compare them side by side is missing, and that's one of the reasons why I really am hoping that vote411.org
Takes off.
is promoted and takes off for the voter, because if the
Mhm.
voter goes there, then the candidates know that the voter is going to go there, and so they'll respond.
Absolutely. That was one of the problems I have in a lot of elections. And New York Times for the bigger elections does a good job of that. Not everybody reads it or whatever, but I need what you need. This is the issue. This is how people's thoughts are about the different things. It's the only way I can do it.
Is that on Vote 411 currently? Is there a comparative tool that you can
Yes.
choose candidates?
Yes.
There is. Great.
And what has been happening is that the candidates have not been going to vote 411 to put in their answers to the questions that are asked on the site for various reasons. I've heard.
Are we doing that instead of the forum though? Like the debates?
No,
Are we,
no.
okay,
It's
we're
an
still
issue.
doing the
No.
debates. Okay.
It's in
No.
addition to. Okay, one of the things I'll wrap that section up with and that question up with is we have some young volunteers in Monmouth County. And one of the things that they are taking on is contacting elected or people who are running for office to say, I'm a young voter in your district, and I would really like to know blah, blah, blah. Would you please fill out the 411? So just as an effort to try to get people to realize that there are young people who know that Vote 411 is there. And like I said, it's a couple. I think we have 3 people working on it, but it's 3 people that didn't do it before. So that's a good thing. And it gets them really engaged in the process. So that's an exciting part too. But let's move on.
That's good info.
I want to. Okay, so the very last slide is this one, which has the information about our website. This is a phone number that we have here in Southern Monmouth County, but it could be used anywhere. It's a dedicated phone number, and other leagues could set this up too if you wanted to. It's a dedicated phone number. When the kids register to vote, we ask them to text the word vote to this number. And when they do that, there's no identification, you know, we're using it for nothing other than this, but then we send out a voting reminder right before the election. So it's just, you know, like the personal touch. So that number is available if you want to share it with anyone else. The next piece of this, let me see if I can get rid of this. If we go back to the website. All right, can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The last piece that I'm going to share with you today, and it's much less involved than what we've been doing, I mean, in terms of activity today, is Module 4, casting your ballot. There are a couple of things that we do. We have a student voting advocate toolkit, and that's going to be the last of the lessons this week. That'll be taught on Thursday. There's also a Module 3, which was developed by a young woman out at Stanford University School of Design that's issue agnostic and nonpartisan. And it helps students identify what leadership qualities they value, what they suspect could be some issues that will face an elected candidate over the course of their term. And then they look at some film clips from 2016 and 2020's primary elections and see if they can find those candidates find those leadership qualities in a candidate, and then see if they think that candidate would be able to solve some of the problems that they've personally identified. That one we're doing on Thursday because that's new and it's a little bit more complicated. And there are 2 versions of it. But the voting simulation is something that I've used on a school-wide basis or a department-wide basis. After we've gone through those first 2, the fighting for this timeline of suffrage and the turnout modules, we can set up a voting simulation that is as close to real as you can believe. I mean, the kids do everything from registering to vote for real if they are eligible to register, or registering on a practice registration form that does not get submitted. All of their names go into a poll book page, which is used during the simulation. The teacher gives us a list of all of the students in the classes that are going to participate, and they get put into these poll book pages. The poll book pages go into a poll book, and we get actual poll workers to volunteer their time to come into school on the day of the election. And I'm not even going to call it a mock election because it's not. It's a simulation. It's much more complicated or complex than a mock election. The students are provided with a sample ballot ahead of time. They learn how to read the sample ballot. They learn how to find out who the candidates are. They're taught how to find out information on those candidates so they can make the decision that they want. They learn what a public question is. They learn how to how to find out what the explanation is and find out more information about it, and then make a decision about what they want their answer to be. They also then we get an actual voting machine. Ours come from the Board of Elections in the County of Monmouth, and I don't know what the availability is in other boards, from other boards of elections. Monmouth County has a designated amount in their budget to provide us with the voting machine, with the programming, with the monitor who needs to come and attend the machine while it's in a school, and with the transportation for that monitor, as well as the transportation of the machine back and forth. It's a gift of about $250 each time we run a mock or a simulated election. The students on the day of the election come down class by class. They are brought up to the tables. The two tables are divided exactly the way they are in a polling station. They go up, they sign their name in the register. They're given a voter identification slip. They go and they get online and they use the voting machine. And like I said, it's an actual programmed voting machine on issues that are pretty much of importance to kids. I'm gonna see if I can find. All right. In the one that we did the last time, the choices that they had to make, like if they were voting for a person, were how voting procedures might be made better in the state of New Jersey. And then the second thing they needed to vote on was, should the Constitution be amended to change the voting age again? The two ballot questions that they had, one was on should the federal government oversee voting practices in states that have a history of voter suppression? So that was an interesting ballot question, given that it happened before what's going on now. And then, do you approve of the state constitution dedicating revenue from state taxes for Jersey parks and forestry? So they get the sample ballot, and this is how it looked. That's what actually was in the machine. They get both sides and they get to vote. I mean, literally push the buttons, and they're taught that they need to push the extra button on the bottom right in order to cast their vote. We have two things happen. We ask the teachers ahead of time to identify one or two students in the class who won't be traumatized if they're challenged at the polls. One of them is marked as having voted by mail. One of them is eliminated from the polling book completely. When that student gets up to the table and goes to sign the poll book, we stop the presses. Nothing else happens until everybody's paying attention. And we teach them that they can ask for a provisional ballot. And we teach them what happens to that ballot. And they actually get a paper ballot and they fill it out, off in a little space in the corner, which is separate from everybody else. And there's a bag there, and they put their vote in the bag. So they actually go through that process. And then we cheat. We do let them go back in and use the machine because we think it's important for them to learn to use the machine too. We do the same thing if a person's name is not in the polling book. Stop the presses. Are you in the right voting district? And if it turns out that they are, what do you do? And so again, the students need to figure out or say, we need a provisional ballot, and we go through the whole thing again. In the last school that we did it in, there were 8 different sections of social studies students who voted. And at the end of the day, we announced the results over the loudspeaker, and you could hear over the whole place the cheers, when there's one. It was an amazing experience.
Right.
In order to run that, because there are steps that you need to take. We developed a handbook for whoever might be doing it, whether it's the classroom teacher, the social studies supervisor, somebody in the community who comes in other than a league member or a league member, of exactly what the objectives are, the materials that you need, and what the environment should look like, what the teachers need to do ahead of time so that the kids are prepared for this, and then a timeline. The one thing, if you decide to do this, that you need to keep in mind is that voting machines are impounded a month before and a month after an election. So for November 2nd, for example, we won't be able to run this event with a voting machine between October 2nd and December 2nd. So when you're talking to schools about doing this, everybody wants it right before the election. Sorry, we can't do it then. And this is why, to keep our elections secure. So schools have done it at other times in the year. It's not a problem. Once they realize why it's happening and they realize the value of the activity, it's not a problem to schedule it another part of the year. So it's 3 months ahead, arranging for the voting machine, 2 months ahead, getting poll workers, and then the physical things. All of these materials we have and we will supply. There are a few things the school needs to come up with, like the table for the poll workers and a separate desk for the ballot, the provisional ballots, but it's a minimal commitment on the part of the school in terms of materials. And then we also keep all of the student information secure. So all of those poll book pages that have student names on them, they get returned to whoever ran the event in the school, the social studies supervisor or whatever. And that person can do with them whatever. They can shred them, they can keep them for themselves. We also ask ahead of time to find out which students have photo clearance so that we can take pictures and make sure that it gets some publicity. So all of the instructions are here. And I think it's pretty thorough. You can access this form through our website. Just as we did before, you go back to the educators and community groups pages, you scroll down and it is right there. Now, there is one other thing that we have that's not linked to the website yet. It's something that I use when I teach citizenship classes, but it is an alternative. And we're really fortunate, I think. The citizenship classes, the preparation for citizenship, have invited us in every single time they've run an election. All right, so it starts here with a series of slides about voting in the United States. We help them identify issues, which you were all talking about before, go over who can vote in New Jersey, and then we go through who, what, when, where, and how of the voting process. So they learn about registering, and then who votes is actually those people who cast a ballot. You can't just register. There are different levels of elections that we have in this country, and each one of them has representatives. When do we vote? We talk about when it's close to the primary, we try to explain to them what a primary election is. And we do have some cute slides for that, but they're all hidden right now. And then for the November general election, we talk about the dates and the deadline for registration, and that there's a deadline for requesting a vote by mail ballot, and there's a deadline for request for getting your vote by mail ballot in, and so on. And then we go through the how. You can do it in person or by mail. We show them what the sample ballot looks like. That one's hidden. The reason that we do certain things: to be sure the election's fair, talk about eligibility and where the signature comes from and so forth, and why the screens are there and why the curtain is there. This is what the vote by mail ballot looks like and how it's kept secure. And then the fact that in New Jersey, and this is not true in every state, but in New Jersey, there's absolutely no connectivity between an individual voting machine and the county. So if anybody tried to hack the machines, they would have to hack every single individual voting machine in the state. And then we talk about the drop boxes too. So that's pretty much, that's available to schools if they don't have the opportunity to provide the voting simulation. At least kids will know what the process is. The reason that's important is that we know from research, or it's supported by research, that young voters often don't turn out to vote because of what we call non-intellective factors. They're afraid, they're unsure, they feel like it's kind of like a stupid thing to do, that only old people do that. All of those non-intellective factors, things that could keep them from going to the polls, need to be addressed somehow. And this addresses the fear factor, the uncomfortable factor. And actually, with some of the feedback that we have gotten from students in the past, that's one of the things that has come up frequently, is that I didn't used to know what to do, and now I feel confident. I really want to get out there and vote. So that's the intention of all of the lessons that are part of the voting side of the Energizing Young Voters lessons. And I think we're doing a good job. I think when we get in front of students, it does make an impact. And I'd kind of like to hear what you have to say about the impact that it had on you overall today. Did it make any difference to you that you spent 3 hours with me?
Yes, it did. Like I said, especially going over the amendments and why each one was important and how the students can understand where they fit in, and why they should vote, and how hard it was to get to the point where we are now for the right to vote, and even with its limitations now and the things that are happening now that we're still fighting for. And I took all my kids in with me when I voted. So I'm wondering is that something that you also encourage them, maybe ask their parents to take them into the booth? I don't know if you shy away from that. Is that,
I think there are age limits that have been put on that. I'm not certain about that, but I do think that has happened.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. But no, I enjoyed this. Thanks, Pat. I think it was great.
So do
All right.
I think that this is, I think this session was fantastic. And I too took my daughter into the, I'm just laughing because when we came out, she was very loud. How come you didn't vote for?
Maybe that's why they changed the law.
But I did take her in to to show her. But I think this is great. I think it's really important, especially with a lot of the young adults that I run across. I think that this is really something that they need to uh, see and participate in this session, um, because the myth, the amount of myths that are out there, you just wouldn't believe. But I thought this was fantastic. Thank you so much, Pat.
Thank you.
Pat and Lori, because Lori.
Yeah. The important thing now is to get the word out and to do some promotion yourself.
Absolutely.
We grow person by person, and that personal recommendation from the people who have really participated in it makes a huge difference. So if you will tell at least one person and try to get us involved, and I know Janice has done that. Janice, you have no idea how involved I am becoming. So Janice has a connection with the Plainfield school system and a social studies supervisor in that system who is just dynamite. So we are ready to run with them. The other thing I'll say when you're talking to people in school districts is that we're more than happy to come in and do a professional development day or a teacher, just a workshop for teachers so that they're first aware of it and have the confidence to be able to teach it themselves. Because in the future, we're not going to be able to jump into every single school district. Just so you have a kind of like a heads up about that, we're working with a company now, Connect for Education, who is changing or taking Fighting for the Vote, the Timeline of Suffrage, and creating a virtual game-like experience that can be used by anyone, by students, by teachers, and so on. Teachers in a classroom or students on a self-paced basis. And it is phenomenal what I've seen to date. It's a totally different format. So, you know, like when we're playing the avatar game, the avatars transform on the screen and are dressed in appropriate clothing of the day and things like that, things we can't do when we're playing the game. So it's pretty exciting to think that it could spread far beyond the borders of New Jersey. But even without that, we could still do that. So
What are you and Melissa presenting at NJEA? Which thing are y'all presenting?
we haven't sat down to talk exactly. I think Melissa's here in these workshops in part to see what everything looks like, so that when we sit down to plan the presentation, we do the best job that we can to encourage as many teachers as possible to pick this up and run with it.
That's great that you got space on that agenda.
You can
Yeah.
thank Melissa for that. She's the
And-
dynamite.
That's
We
amazing.
still don't know if we're virtual or in person,
both.
or did they say both? Because I think the final vote is coming this weekend with our
Oh.
executive board meeting.
Oh, because they asked me if we were willing to do both. So I
They
just
were
assumed that
planning for both, but the way things are moving right now, something may change again.
yes, that's true. Well,
Yeah.
whatever we do, it's one more thing that gets the programs in front of people. So that's the goal.
I'm blown away. I know that you guys all have history with the organization, but wow. I just think everything I saw was so high quality and so strategic, really well done.
Thanks.
Really
Yeah,
well done.
it very well done. Actually, I do have a question.
Good.
I have two
Go ahead.
questions. Would I be able to present this program?
You absolutely could.
The reason why I'm asking is because I've dealt with a couple of young adults and that graduated this past June
Mhm.
off to college. For example, one is going to Duke, one is going north, and so to Northeastern, I think. And so my hope is to kind of go over this process so that they take it up there to college with them.
Wonderful.
You know, and you had said give them a name. I call them future advocates. That's what I call them.
Good.
So that's good to know. And my second question is, can I contact you? Because of course I'm not going to retain everything that I learned today.
Absolutely.
I'm being
Absolutely.
honest. Okay.
Yes, use the energizingyouingvoters@gmail.com so that I
Okay.
know that that's specifically what you're
Okay.
addressing. You know,
Yes.
you can send me a personal email, but you get through to me faster on the other one.
Okay.
The other thing is, I mean, you can go to our website, like I showed you, and just go right to the program. And if you take a look at it yourself, you will see that there is a word by word, click by click. You know, when you finish this word, click on it. And you can easily do the program yourself, as can those kids when they get to wherever they're going.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I when you had said that the you know who like young adults or the high schoolers, because I'm working with a couple of those.
Rosemary, since you mentioned using the materials yourself, I would encourage you to do that. If you want help, if you want somebody else in the situation, we have a sign up that we can get a volunteer to work with you who is experienced. So
Excellent.
don't be afraid to reach out. We'll make it work one way or the other.
Perfect.
I can also give you a couple of things that we've learned over the course of time that have made it better in terms of presentation. The first one is to pretty much stick to the script. And I don't mean that you have to read it word by word. In fact, it's better if you don't and make sure that they're seeing what you want them to see. The other thing that I would say is, even if you're reading, try to read it with expression so that the people feel as if you're actually talking to them and not just reading a book. One of the snafus that I've run into sometimes are people on the other end not being comfortable using technology, not being able to open the slideshow so they can give their students the avatars, not knowing how to use the chart like I sent to you with your name and the number and all that kind of stuff. So I would say support them the best that you can if you're doing it yourself.
Okay.
Do it for them if you have to. And I have actually done that. I've sent a picture of the avatar and the student's name next to it so that the teacher didn't have to worry about that piece of it. And then practice your timing, because if you've only got 40 minutes, you don't want to have to cut it right in the middle of something. And there are times when we've gone back and we've just eliminated slides and tried not to eliminate the most important things, but make sure that it's going to fit within that time period. And then, as I said before, judge your audience in terms of the hidden slides so that you don't wind up creating an issue that you don't need to create. And
Yes.
keep that sense of balance. So, any other questions from you?
Thank you. Thank you for the tips.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I'm going to
Oh.
dismiss you 4 minutes early.
I do have one question. My granddaughter might want to join the rest of the week. Can she join?
Awesome.
My
Of
granddaughter?
course,
Okay.
Janice, of course.
All right,
Cool.
thank you.
I'm so glad I joined, Pat. It was great. It's
Fantastic
helpful.
job.
Great.
Okay,
So much.
some of you, I know I will see again, and those that I don't, I'm so glad that you joined today. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much.